We begin tonight with today's dramatic, high-energy, rah-rah return of campaign trail Barack Obama.
So long as I have the privilege of serving as your president, I will not stop fighting for you. I won't stop fighting to make sure there's accountability in our financial system. I'm not going to stop fighting until we have jobs for everybody. I'm not going to stop fighting to give our kids the best education possible. I won't stop fighting to give every American a fair shake. I won't stop fighting to open up government. I won't stop fighting to cut waste and abuse in Washington. I want to march forward with you. I want to work with you. I want to fight for you. I hope you're willing to stand by me even during these tough times, because I believe in a brighter future for America.
At the tail end of a week that most Democrats would probably rather forget, President Obama not so quietly transitioned back into campaigner mode, hitting the road in Elyria, Ohio to pick a populist fight with Wall Street and whoever in politics will stand in the way of his economic agenda. Now, this is not new in terms of policy, but President Obama taking it on in this way, with this kind of a rally on the road in a very familiar battleground state, sort of proof positive that the calendar has flipped to 2010 and Democrats have elections to win. Much of President Obama's fire today was directed toward Wall Street, which happens to be A, a very soft target right now, and B, pretty good politics, since it's an issue that Republicans are on the very unpopulist side of.
We're having a fight right now because I want to charge Wall Street a modest fee to repay taxpayers in full for saving their skins in a time of need. We want our money back. We want our money back. And we're going to get your money back every dime. Each and every dime.
Who would be opposed to something like that? Well, after President Obama introduced the idea last week, Republicans slammed it as an Obama tax. A tax that, quote, will only drain capital from the financial system. Quote, how are you going to tax banks and expect them to lend more is frankly lunacy. Scott Brown, Mr. Populist, Mr. I Drive a Truck, campaigned against President Obama's bank fee. The poor banks, poor Wall Street. Thank goodness Republicans are there looking out for them. Otherwise, they might have to pay back the taxpayer money they were given. This isn't hyperbole. Republicans literally have positioned themselves against getting our money back from the banks. They're standing up for the poor, beleaguered Goldman Sachs of the world against the mean taxpayers. Yet Republicans are so cocky about their chances in 2010, I'm not sure they've thought through how this one's really going to sound on the campaign trail this year. President Obama today pointed out yet another legislative fault line separating Democrats and Republicans quite sharply.
So long as I'm president, I won't stop fighting to protect you from the kinds of deceptive practices we've seen from some in the financial sector. That's why I'm fighting for a tough consumer financial protection agency to protect you against those hidden overdraft fees that can make a single ATM withdrawal cost $30.
Yeah, who would be against a consumer financial protection agency? I mean, who thinks it's cool for an ATM withdrawal to secretly cost you $30 because banks have become fine print ripoff artists? At a time when banks and credit card companies are about as beloved as an alligator in a duck pond, who would want to campaign against something like this? Which costs banks really nothing, but it does protect citizens from the infuriating ways that we've all been ripped off by banks. Meet Republican Senator Mike Johans. He sits on the Senate Banking Committee. He's against it. He, just like his Republican colleagues, he is against the banks and credit card companies' no ripoff bill. He calls it a potential power grab over the nation's economy. The top Republican on the House Banking Committee is also against it. Republicans are positioning themselves on economic issues for 2010 as siding with big business and banks and Wall Street on every major proposal for legislation. And that is the political equivalent of a glass jaw. And the White House today suggested and demonstrated how Democrats could take swings at that glass jaw. But you don't win a campaign in America today just by appealing to your base, just by saying the other guys have it wrong. You have to appeal to independents. And this year's flavor of independent, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, leans libertarian. So for the prospects for Democrats attracting independents in this year's campaign, There is the issue of taking on Wall Street, and Dems also have to thank the Supreme Court. Yesterday's radical Supreme Court ruling opens up the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending on campaigns. It says big business can spend as much money as it wants to trying to defeat one candidate or another. Individual citizens' freedom to affect our democracy, anyone's ability to make a difference who isn't named Exxon. Consider yourself squished under the heel of special interests and the nation's most rich and powerful companies. And Republican politicians are all in favor of it.
I think the Supreme Court decisions today are a big win for the First Amendment and a step in the right direction. Well, let the American people decide how much money is enough.
Exxon wants to spend $10 billion. You have the right to spend $10 billion. Republicans have been rejoicing in this Supreme Court ruling because it likely means that big business will have an even larger megaphone to defeat their traditional Democratic opponents. And while elected Republicans are psyched about this, I'm not sure that the libertarian-minded independents the Republicans thought they had all locked up for this year are going to be so psyched about this. For all the small c conservatives in America, this is a nightmare ruling. Corporations are not people. I mean, do they have the right to bear arms now, too? Do they get the right to vote? No, they're business entities, which as aggregators of capital have an unfair advantage over citizens and their ability to buy influence in campaigns. That's why corporate politicking was limited before, to preserve individual freedom to make a difference in politics. This is a century of settled law and multiple Supreme Court precedents swept away in this radical decision. And there is a partisan wash over the reaction to this ruling so far. I think because it was the conservative justices who made this ruling. But if there really is a libertarian, freedom-based resurgence in small c conservative politics in America, and in independent politics in particular, if this rallying cry for personal freedom, individual freedom, is for real, and not just some AstroTurf branding on what's really a corporate agenda, like they keep assuring us, then these folks in the streets are not going to be psyched about the power that corporations were just handed in politics, quite literally at the expense of individual freedom. Citizens, real people. This might be great for the business wing of the establishment, right, of establishment party politics, but this is deadly for everyone else's political power. And some principled conservatives are already starting to figure this out. And yet, elected Republicans are lining up behind it. Republicans are celebrating it as a big win. And that is a huge political opening for President Obama and the Democrats. That is an aces-high political royal flush for Democrats if Republicans stay with this corporate agenda, and if Obama and Democrats can define themselves as the people who are going to save the country from greedy Wall Street and from this Supreme Court-imposed disaster for individual freedom. That's if President Obama can define himself as the guy who's against this Supreme Court ruling, if Democrats can define themselves as the one who will fix it. Can they fix it? Last night, Barney Frank, chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, told us that he thinks they can.
Corporations are not natural beings. They only exist by law. That's why it was so odd that the court found that they had this constitutional right. But what we can do that's perfectly statutorily possible and constitutionally, I believe, unassailable, is to impose restrictions as a matter of corporate law on what corporations can do. They are given special treatment. They have liabilities that are limited. They have all kinds of privileges. We have traditionally conditioned those privileges on rules. And I talked today to a couple of my colleagues, and when we get back in on in session, I'm going to designate a couple of my colleagues on the Financial Services Committee to begin working to prepare a package of legislation that will put some restraints on this.
I wonder where the Republicans on the committee will be on it when it comes before them. Joining us now is the Washington Post's Ezra Klein. Ezra, thanks very much for joining us on a Friday night. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you, Rachel.
How do you read the political strategy of going hard against the banks like this? We haven't seen a change in proposed policies today, but we have seen a real change in tone.
Scott Brown is probably the worst thing to ever happen to healthcare reform, but the best to ever happen to financial regulation. What basically happened there, I think, was that Democrats may still want to pass a healthcare bill, but they're so compromised on it that they can't message on it. What they can do is sort of take the financial regulation fight, which was until now an inside game in Congress. It's already passed the House, moving through the Senate. People probably even haven't heard much about it. And they can move on that. They can make that into a real war. That's particularly true now that they don't have sort of the onus of being able to just push it through. Republicans are either either going to stand up and help them in the Senate or they can block it. So at this point, Democrats have an incentive to get the people on their side so the Republicans can actually block it. That creates a sort of a different legislative environment for them than they were in a week ago.
Are Democrats going to have a blue dog problem on this anti-Wall Street and this reforming of Wall Street agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing about this, the SCOTUS ruling, a lot of blue dogs get a lot of money from these folks. You know, it doesn't all go one way. Hedge funds, big Democratic donors. So there will be that. But I do think that one thing that might move the blue dogs in the other direction is the thing about being a blue dog is you're generally a very vulnerable Democrat. And one thing people don't like right now is the banks. So right now, in a bad year for Democrats with Republicans seeming ascendant, whether or not the blue dogs are going to be there on the legislation, my sense is they're going to be there at least on the rhetoric.